Roy Lichtenstein was born October 27, 1923 in New York City. He was the eldest of two children born to Milton and Beatrice Werner Lichtenstein. His father, Milton, was a real estate broker, and his mother, Beatrice, was a housewife that had previously trained as a pianist. Roy had early exposure to the New York City culture as a child because Beatrice often took Roy and his younger sister, Renee, to museums and concerts around the city. This led to the cultivation of Roy's artistic style. He spent his teenage years at the American Museum of Natural History and the Museum of Modern Art. He started exploring drawing and sculpting as inspiration from visiting these places. He had also spent a lot of time in Midtown at jazz concerts, which inspired him to learn piano and the clarinet. In his teenage years, Lichtenstein explored his artistic abilities by attending watercolor classes at Parsons School of Design.
Roy Lichtenstein studied at Art Students League in New York in 1939. He continued his education from 1940 to 1943 at The Ohio State University in Columbus. There, he was particularly influenced by Hoyt L. Sherman, who was a late Fauvist painter and taught his students about modernism. However, his studies were interrupted with the start of World War II.
During World War II, Lichtenstein served as an infantryman. He saw combat in Germany, France, and Belgium, where he trained as a pilot, engineer, and in linguistics. The influence that these experiences had can be seen in some components of his artworks.
Lichtenstein served in Europe and did not return to America until 1946. Shortly after returning, he earned his Master of Fine Arts in 1949.
In 1949, he married Isabel Wilson Suriski, who worked at an art gallery where Lichtenstein exhibited his work. However, the two separated about 10 years later. Lichtenstein remarried in 1968 to Dorothy Herska, who, like Suriski, worked at a gallery where Lichtenstein exhibited his work.
Lichtenstein was known for creating works which mocked the European modern artists of the time, including Pablo Picasso and Kandinsky. Lichtenstein soon began developing his style. While his pieces mocked Picasso's work, he began showing interest in the Rococo in the mid-1950s. It was not until the late 1950s that Lichtenstein finally adopted his abstract style that he is well known for today. More specifically, Lichtenstein painted comics beginning in the early 1960s, which would become some of his most well-known works around the globe and staple pieces for the pop art movement.
His work was revolutionary because it appealed to art that was regarded as lowly. Lichtenstein's pop art marked a major shift from abstract expressionism. This was Lichtenstein's goal because he wanted to poke fun at artists like Pablo Picasso and Braque.
Lichtenstein's art career took off in 1962 when he had his first single artist exhibition. This exhibition afforded him a bigger reputation within the art world, thus giving him the world stage for his most popular works, which would be produced in the mid-1960s.
By the mid-1960s, Roy Lichtenstein was regarded as one of the leaders of the pop art movement along with Andy Warhol and Claes Oldenburg. His work shifted focus in the 1970s, reflecting the artists of the early and mid-20th century, such as Pablo Picasso and Salvador Dali.
In the 1980s, Lichtenstein worked more with designing modern house interiors. This demonstrated the abandonment of his previous subject matter. During this period, he also experimented with sculpture. His work shifted shortly before his death in the 1990s, demonstrating his desire to expand the scope of his art. Lichtenstein had made 3 major series: the interiors, which focused on reflections from windows and mirrors, the nudes, which portrayed nude women in his comic-like style, and his Chinese landscapes. Despite shifting the focus of his artwork between the 1960s and the 1990s, Lichtenstein continued to display his comic-like style. He remained active in the art world until his death on September 29, 1997. Aside from his career as a painter, Lichtenstein was also involved in teaching art. He taught at several schools, including his alma mater, Ohio State University, as well as the State University of New York at Oswego, and Douglas College, Rutgers University.
The artwork that we are currently looking at, Lichtenstein titled Figures with Sunset, which he created in 1978. The size of this painting is 107 by 167 inches, which takes up almost this entire wall. The medium he chose was oil and magna, which is an acrylic resin on canvas. The color palette is restricted to mostly primary colors, such as red, yellow, blue, green, as well as a significant amount of black and white. He chose to use primary colors to create a sense of happiness within the viewer, because one of Lichtenstein's ultimate goals was to have his paintings be enjoyable to the viewer. This painting is actually also a reflection of art history and pokes fun at abstract expressionism, because Lichtenstein took a modern landscape and reinterpreted it into a pop art style. Techniques of pointillism are also able to be viewed, utilizing dots to add dimensionality. The style is also apparent in comic strips. It mirrors an inkjet printer by creating individual dots. Lichtenstein had also made other comics with more realistic figures, so this was a shift to a more abstracted type of form, and it was more of a surrealist type of work than any of his other previous works. As the surrealists wanted to do, he demonstrated a dreamlike landscape, which is similar to a lot of Dali's works. He incorporated many objects and human features in various locations, using geometry, circles, squares, lines, and triangles in different areas of the painting, similar to Picasso's Cubist synthetic style, attempting to show movement. So it was like a continuous collage.
Many of Lichtenstein's works were meant to mock commercialism. He created works which were very detailed and took a long time to produce. But his paintings had irony because actual comics could be produced in masses. In fact, Lichtenstein's paintings took so long to make because he insisted on hand-painting Ben-Day dots in order to mimic comic strip characteristics. Ben-Day dots are dots which typically appear in printing. This was essential to Lichtenstein's work because his art during this period attempted to imitate the commercialized nature of relying on machinery to produce art. This contributed to Lichtenstein's social commentary about how art could now be produced in masses. For this reason, his pieces were inherently ironic. His pieces required a lot of time and effort to be produced, despite the available option to use technology which could produce it in minutes. Additionally, Lichtenstein's work offers commentary on how industrialization has taken over the art world to the point where artists don't even need to be producing their own works. They can simply rely on machinery to produce it in large numbers. This painting demonstrates cropped and enlarged elements. This can be seen with the man who is emerging from the right side of the painting, who makes up a large portion of the canvas. Overall, the painting shows many enlarged shapes emerging from all sides of the canvas. This creates a sense of division within the painting, as there appears to be no consistent landscape. The painting also has unique orientations of its subject matter, reflecting the synthetic cubist styles of Picasso and Braque. All the shapes and content of the painting are turned at varying angles and scattered randomly across the canvas. This reflects the collage style that is presented in synthetic cubism. Its strange subject matter, the man who emerges from the side of the canvas, the eyes which appear multiple times across the painting, and the unique shapes reflect content that can be seen in surrealist paintings, specifically in the works of Salvador Dali. When viewing this piece, the audience gets a sense of being in a dream, as the painting's content demonstrates what can be interpreted as a product of the subconscious. The painting also uses bold forms and bright juxtaposing colors. In many of his works, Cezanne uses bold outlining of his figures to give his objects a sense of weight. Similarly, Lichtenstein uses bold outlining to assert the presence of the figures in the painting. The bright colors of this piece contribute to Lichtenstein's goal of creating works of art that his audience could enjoy.
Lichtenstein often included optical illusions into his paintings. He did this to grasp his viewers' attention and make them question the nature of what reality is. At the same time, this gave a sense of humor to the work and played on the absurd. Lichtenstein's works faced a lot of criticism. Many people called him a plagiarist. His critics accused him of simply copying comic book panels and transforming them into cohesive works of art by blowing them up and putting them in a museum setting. Conceptually, this is the same thing that Duchamp was doing, giving a new artistic perspective to something that was not usually seen in a traditional museum setting. If you note the location in which this work was placed in this gallery, it actually adds a lot of significance to the work. So his work is actually next to a lot of his other works that came before he painted this. So we're able to see a progression that he had to more abstracted forms. Also on this floor is a lot of Andy Warhol's works. Andy Warhol was from the same pop art movement. So having Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein's works together, we're able to see that they were both part of the same movement, and their styles are the same in some ways, but also very different in others. But ultimately, we see a lot of the same common themes from the pop artist movement in both of their works.
In many ways, Lichtenstein's work can be interpreted as mocking the commercialism of Warhol's work. Andy Warhol was known for making silkscreens, which were easy to produce in large numbers. In fact, Warhol did not even need to be present for these works of art to be made. He simply could have hired someone to produce his silkscreens. Contrarily, Lichtenstein produced works which took a long time to make, but mimicked art which was typically produced quickly. For this reason, Warhol's work reflects the commercialism that Lichtenstein's art aims to address.
Lichtenstein's works were relevant because they reflected the popular culture of the time, as well as society's shift towards a more industrial, technological society.
In a way, Lichtenstein was documenting the progression and trends of society as they were occurring. For this reason, Lichtenstein was able to become one of the leaders of the pop art movement, and his artwork continues to exhibit its influence today.